It began with dust. A soft, weightless film of time that covered the metal handle of a desk no one had touched in years. Room 204 at Silverton Middle School had sat vacant since the end of spring semester the year Mr. Dale Tennyson quietly handed in his retirement notice. No ceremony, no farewell, just a locked door and a set of keys left on the principal's desk. When Michelle Carter, the new 8th grade history teacher, was assigned the room, she didn't think much of it. The space smelled faintly of old chalk and mildew. The bookshelves sagged. On the whiteboard was a message written in fading red marker. History never forgets. It would have been poetic if it weren't about to be terrifyingly literal. On a quiet Thursday afternoon in May 2023, Michelle stayed late after school to clear out the filing cabinets and drawers. Most were empty. A few still held dried-out pens and lesson plans from a decade ago. But when she pulled open the bottom right-hand drawer of Mr. Tennyson's desk, something unusual caught her eye. It was wedged beneath a stack of yellowing newspapers and a broken compass, a small folded piece of cardstock soft and faded with age. She picked it up, unfolded it, and there it was. Silverton Middle School, Field Trip Pass, Bus 6, Seat 13. Name, Rachel Morgan. Date, May 16, 2003. Michelle stared at it, confused. A student bus pass? From 20 years ago? She looked again. The corners were worn, but the ink was unmistakably real. A student's name she didn't recognize, but something about it felt wrong. Why was it here? In a locked drawer, in a room no one had used in months. She turned the card over. On the back, in pencil faint but legible, was a sentence scribbled in shaky handwriting. I never got on the bus. She dropped the ticket, and the silence in the room shifted. Silverton is the kind of town where everybody still knows everybody else, or thinks they do. Set against the evergreens of Oregon's Willamette Valley, it's a place that hasn't changed much since 2003. The diner still serves cherry pie on Thursdays. The hardware store still gives discounts to veterans, and the middle school sits just off Main Street, its brick facade unchanged for 50 years. But there's one thing people stopped talking about a long time ago. Rachel Morgan, 13 years old. Straight A student. Loved astronomy and sketching waterfalls. Went missing on a school field trip and was never found. For 2 decades, her name had been pushed into the soft soil of collective forgetting. A tragic headline turned cold case. The kind of story that becomes rumor, then cautionary tale, then nothing. Until that drawer was opened. When Silverton police were notified, the ticket was taken in as evidence. But for the younger officers, it meant little. Just another item in a long-forgotten case file. It wasn't until one of the senior detectives, Alan Reyes, who had been fresh on the force when Rachel disappeared, saw the handwriting on the back that things changed. Alan hadn't thought about Rachel Morgan in years. He still remembered the search, the questions, the unanswered calls from her parents. And the way the school handled it quietly, cautiously, as if they feared bad publicity more than a lost child. The phrase hit him like a memory. I never got on the bus. But Rachel had been marked present. The roll sheet showed her name. No one reported her missing until that evening after the buses had returned, and her mother came to pick her up from school. A missing girl who no one saw leave. And now a bus ticket, the kind collected by the teacher in charge, at the end of each trip found in that same teacher's drawer 20 years later. Mr. Dale Tennyson. Dale had taught 8th grade history at Silverton for nearly 3 decades. Beloved by students, respected by staff. The kind of teacher who wore sweater vests and quoted Teddy Roosevelt. But also the kind who lived alone. No spouse, no children. Drove a faded green Ford pickup and walked to school rain or shine. When Rachel disappeared in 2003, he was the lead chaperone for her group, Bus 6, his bus. He claimed not to have seen anything. The last he remembered, she was eating lunch near the lower falls. He assumed she had gotten back on board like everyone else. That was what he told the principal. That was what he told police. There was no reason to doubt him. Until now. Tom Morgan stood in the police station holding the bus ticket in his hands. He hadn't touched anything of Rachel's in over a decade. Her room had been packed away, her clothes donated. Her sketches, hundreds of them kept in a box in the attic he couldn't bring himself to open. Now, a piece of her had come back. Not through a miracle, but through something far stranger. A teacher's drawer, sealed for 2 decades. "She wrote that?" he asked, voice hoarse. "That's her handwriting?" "We're having it analyzed," Detective Reyes replied, "but it's a strong match." Tom sat down. His knees had started to give. His wife Denise passed 5 years earlier. She died without ever knowing what happened to their daughter. Now maybe, just maybe, the silence was cracking. The investigation reopened within 48 hours. Room 204 was sealed, the entire desk taken in for forensic examination. Police interviewed school staff still employed. Most remembered Dale as meticulous, distant but kind, a little odd. One former teacher, now retired, said Dale had once reprimanded Rachel for turning in a paper he thought was plagiarized. He said she was hiding something, the teacher recalled. Said he hated lies. There were no disciplinary records, no complaints, nothing to suggest misconduct. But that's the thing about small towns. Secrets don't rot out in the open. They're preserved in old drawers, locked away until the right hand opens the right handle. And sometimes the evidence has waited there all along. In a locked filing cabinet in the school's administrative office, Detective Reyes found something else. A trip roster. Silverton Middle School Field Excursion. Silver Falls State Park. May 16, 2003. Chaperone. Mr. Dale Tennyson. Bus 6. 27 students. Each student's name had a box checked beside it. Rachel Morgan's box was checked, but there was no signature from the bus driver. No indication the count was ever verified independently. And yet Mr. Tennyson had signed off. The night Rachel went missing, there was a thunderstorm over the foothills. Search crews fanned out through the trees, combing muddy trails and creeks. Dogs picked up no scent. Helicopters circled for 2 days. Nothing. It was as if she had evaporated. Her backpack, her camera, even the lunch she packed gone. And all along, everyone had assumed she got on the bus. Now, that assumption was crumbling. Detective Reyes visited Erin Blake, Rachel's best friend in middle school, now a nurse living in Salem. When she saw the ticket, she froze. "She told me she wasn't feeling well that day," Erin said slowly. "She said she didn't want to ride back on Dale's bus. I didn't think anything of it. I thought maybe she had a stomachache." "Did she say why?" Erin hesitated. "She just said he looked at her strange sometimes. That's all. We were kids. What did we know?" Reyes asked if Rachel ever gave her anything, a letter, a note, something written. "She gave me her sketchbook," Erin said suddenly, "the one she always carried. She said, 'Hold on to it, just in case.' I thought she was being dramatic. We were 13. She brought it out from a drawer, wrapped in tissue, faded but intact. Inside the front cover was a post-it, written in the same shaky pencil as the ticket. 'Tell someone if I don't come back.' Rachel Morgan never made it home from that field trip. For 20 years, her name lived in a file. Now, her voice faint, buried, but still there had been pulled back into the light, in graphite on cardstock, folded, hidden, waiting. A drawer that should have been empty, but wasn't. The last photo taken of Rachel Morgan is grainy and poorly framed. A group shot. Dozens of students bunched together near the base of the falls, grinning into a May afternoon in 2003. Rachel is on the far right, half-turned, her long brown hair swept back into a messy braid. She isn't smiling. Her arms are crossed. And her eyes, even in that low-resolution image, seem fixed on something behind the camera, something no one else saw. The photo was taken at 1:12 p.m., time-stamped on a disposable Kodak that one of her classmates brought. By 3:15 p.m., the buses were pulling out of the Silver Falls State Park parking lot. By 4:05 p.m., Rachel was marked absent from homeroom. And by 5:22 p.m., her mother was standing in the school office, her hands shaking, asking why her daughter hadn't come home. The school couldn't answer, neither could the chaperones. Her name was on the roll sheet. Her seat on bus 6, seat 13 had been assigned. But when the bus returned, no one had noticed whether she was on it. It was like trying to solve a riddle when you don't even know what's missing. Her classmates gave conflicting answers. Some said they thought she was sick. Others assumed she had gone back with another group. One girl claimed to have seen her walking with Mr. Tennyson near the visitor center. Another swore she was the last one in line for lunch. And none of it added up. Back in 2023, Detective Reyes pinned the group photo on the whiteboard in his office. Beside it, he clipped the rediscovered bus ticket, and next to that a copy of the trip roster with every student's name, including Rachel's, checked off in Dale Tennyson's tight handwriting. The whole board looked like a conspiracy theory waiting to be solved. But the longer Reyes stared at it, the more it felt like something else entirely. Negligence wrapped in routine. Assumptions turned into evidence. No one had double-checked the head count. No one verified the list. Rachel had vanished in the white space between structure and oversight, a girl too quiet to raise concern, too ordinary to trigger alarm. Until it was too late. Rachel's father, Tom, kept himself busy with repairs. He'd taken early retirement from the Postal Service after Denise passed. These days he filled his hours fixing old radios and restoring broken watches. But after the discovery of the ticket, he pulled a different kind of box from the top shelf of the garage. It was dusty. Untouched since 2004. Inside were Rachel's old notebooks, her school IDs, a field trip permission slip signed in blue ink, and near the bottom the sweater she wore the day she vanished, pale blue, still faintly smelling of the citrus detergent Denise always used. Tom held it to his chest and sat there in silence, like a man trying to remember the exact weight of time. Detective Reyes began piecing together the timeline from that day, starting with the bus logs. Bus 6, driven by Carl Lanning, departed the school at 7:52 a.m. with 27 students, plus Mr. Tennyson and a junior teacher named Lisa Price. The group arrived at the state park at 9:10 a.m., split into hiking subgroups, and had lunch at 12:30. The buses were scheduled to leave at 3 o'clock. But here's what no one had noticed until now. The park ranger logbook maintained at the main station noted that a green Ford pickup truck was seen parked briefly at the maintenance access road at 2:43 p.m. No visitors were allowed in that area. It was designated for school staff or emergency personnel only. And in the official trip plan, Mr. Plan, Tennyson had been granted vehicle access that day for equipment transport. It was the first time that detail had resurfaced in 2 decades. Rachel's friend Aaron was called back in for a second interview. This time, she brought something else, a tiny Polaroid, curled at the edges, taken during lunch that day, just before the hike back to the buses. It showed Rachel sitting alone on a bench, sketchbook open, a pencil resting in her mouth as she concentrated on a tree trunk across the path. And beside her, just barely in frame, the edge of a man's khaki pant leg and a brown leather shoe. "I didn't notice it at the time," Aaron said, her voice tight. "But now I think he was sitting with her, watching her." Reyes sent the photo for analysis. 2 days later, the lab called back with a detail. The shoes matched a discontinued model sold only to school faculty in the region during 2001-2004, issued with a uniform program Silverton District had piloted. Only a handful of teachers had received that exact make. One of them was Dale Tennyson. The question now was brutal in its simplicity. If Rachel never got on the bus, where did she go? And who took her there? The answer, Reyes suspected, lay not just in where she didn't go, but who ensured she disappeared without notice. He revisited the remaining members of the chaperone team, including Lisa Price, now working as a counselor at a different school. She remembered the day vividly. "We were all spread out," Lisa said. "The groups were supposed to check in by 2:45. I remember Dale saying he was going to find one last student. He didn't say who. I didn't think to question it." "Did he come back with anyone?" Reyes asked. I don't think so," she said slowly. "But he seemed out of breath, sweaty. I remember him wiping his forehead. I asked if he was okay. He said, 'Just warm in the trees. That's all.'" "Did anyone else notice?" Lisa shook her head. "I wish I had." The school's transportation coordinator from 2003, long since retired, was tracked down to a small town outside Eugene. Reyes made the drive himself. The man's name was Bill Hargrove, now 80, with hands that trembled slightly as he poured coffee. Reyes laid the copy of the field trip roster on the table. "You signed off on this." Bill studied it for a long time. "Looks like my signature, yeah. But I don't remember doing final counts. That was always up to the lead teacher." "Mr. Tennyson." "Yeah," Dale was thorough. "Never thought he'd miss a name." Reyes turned the page. "Did anyone ever question how those rosters were verified?" "No," Bill said quietly. "We trusted the teachers. That's how it was back then." Trust. It kept the gears moving. It also hid the cracks. Then came the oddest discovery yet. From a box of outdated security forms retrieved from a defunct server, the tech team at Silverton School District recovered a single, corrupted file. After 2 days of data recovery, it opened. An email sent on May 17, 2003, the morning after Rachel disappeared. From dtennyson@silverton.k12.or.us. To Principal at Silverton, Kadosi, or Us. Subject: Temporary absence. Due to a sudden migraine episode, I will not be in today or tomorrow. The trip was physically draining. I'll be back Wednesday. Please let me know if anything urgent arises. It had never been referenced in the original case. No doctor's note was ever filed. And Dale never reported illness again in his career. There is a moment, in every case, when the past begins to breathe again, when dusty folders stop being paper and start being memory. Rachel's story was no longer a gap in the timeline. It was beginning to take shape not as a mystery, but as a sequence. Someone had gone to great lengths to remove her. And someone had quietly lived for 20 years with the knowledge of what they did. The drawer had opened. The truth, at last, was beginning to exhale. There's something peculiar about school furniture. It doesn't age the way other things do. The scratches stay sharp. The graffiti never fades. The smell, a blend of pencil lead, paper, and time, seeps into the wood and settles like a permanent memory. When detectives began inventorying room 204 in its entirety, they weren't just cataloging objects. They were unearthing a sealed environment, untouched since Dale Tennyson left it behind. In a locked cabinet beneath the classroom globe, they found a box labeled simply Archives. M. Inside were 37 manila folders, each containing photocopies of field trip records, lesson plans, and handwritten feedback from students. Most of it was standard, organized, predictable. But one folder thicker than the rest was titled 2002-2003, Special Disciplinary Notes. It wasn't listed in the school's official documentation. It contained 3 sheets of paper. All 3 had Rachel Morgan's name at the top. The first note, dated the 4th of February, 2003, detailed an incident in which Rachel had refused to read aloud in class. Subject became visibly agitated, Tennyson wrote. Mumbled that she was being watched, maybe attention-seeking. The second, dated the 12th of March, described her skipping lunch and sitting alone in the library for 2 consecutive days. Student is withdrawn. Passive resistance to participation. Will recommend counseling. The third was undated, but it was the most disturbing. Written in looser, hurried script, it read, Rachel continues to stare during class. It's unsettling. I've requested her seat be moved. She seems to know when I'm watching. No official follow-up ever occurred. There were no counseling referrals, no parent meetings. The folder was never submitted to administration. It had remained in that globe cabinet, out of sight, waiting for 20 years to resurface. Detective Reyes returned to Aaron Blake's apartment with a photocopy of the third note. He didn't show it to her at first. Instead, he asked one question. Did Rachel ever say anything about feeling unsafe? Erin didn't answer right away. She folded her hands, her thumbs moving nervously in a circle. She said, weird things. She'd say stuff like, he's too quiet when he walks, or he listens when the room goes silent. I didn't understand. I thought she was being poetic. Rachel was always dramatic. Reyes placed the note in front of her. Erin read it twice before she looked up, tears in her eyes. "I think she knew," she whispered. "I think she knew something was going to happen." In May of 2003, the police had interviewed Dale Tennyson for just under 45 minutes. The transcript, pulled from the original case file, was bland. Standard questions, standard answers. He had taken attendance. He had supervised lunch. He had driven back in bus 6. He hadn't noticed Rachel missing until school called his classroom the next morning. At no point was he asked about his relationship with her. At no point was he asked to turn over his personal belongings. And at no point was his vehicle searched. That was standard practice at the time unless probable cause existed. And in Rachel's case, there was none. No evidence of foul play. No witnesses. Just a missing girl and a timeline made of assumptions. The green Ford pickup that Tennyson had driven back then had since been sold. Through DMV records, Reyes tracked it to a junkyard in Roseburg. The vehicle had been scrapped in 2011. But in the registry logs, one item stood out: a repair order from July 2003. The mechanic had written, "Cleaned interior, deeply strong odor. Removed back seat carpeting per customer request." Reyes drove down to interview the mechanic, an elderly man named Curtis who still remembered the job. Guy said he spilled deer bait in the back. Said it stank, Curtis recalled. Didn't seem like a hunter, though. Real quiet guy. Wore a tie to the shop. "What did you do with the carpet?" Reyes asked. Curtis shrugged. "Tossed it. Wasn't worth keeping." "Any stains?" Curtis paused. "Yeah," he said, "dark ones, but I figured it was bait, like he said." "Would you recognize his photo?" "I might." Reyes pulled up a yearbook photo from 2003. Dale, standing stiff in a red sweater vest, arms folded, unsmiling. Curtis nodded. "That's him. There are moments in cold cases when the trail doesn't just go cold, it disappears." Reyes knew he was chasing ghosts. The carpet was long gone. The pickup had been crushed. There were no physical remains. No confirmed crime scene. Not even a warrant yet. Just a thread, growing tighter. But then came a break, not from the field but from a librarian. Silverton's public library had been undergoing digitization. Old microfilms and local newsletters were being scanned into the cloud. A volunteer noticed a series of clippings from 2003 that mentioned the school's poetry anthology, a project led by Dale Tennyson featuring student submissions. One poem published in May 2003, 2 days before the field trip, had been written by Rachel Morgan. It read, "The trees have eyes where no one looks. The creek speaks truths no teacher took. I sit in shade. My name unknown. A path to silence. All alone." The librarian flagged it. Reyes read it twice. And then again. It wasn't just poetry. It was a message. He visited Rachel's old bedroom the next morning. Tom had finally opened the attic box and laid out her drawings. Dozens of waterfall sketches, forest canopies, trail maps, inked with red lines, but one caught Reyes's attention. It was dated May 15, the day before she disappeared. The drawing showed a school bus, small, almost childlike, parked near the edge of a clearing. Behind it, a dark figure. Not detailed, just a shape, shadowed, with no face. In Rachel's scrawled handwriting at the bottom, "He stands where no one sees." Tom looked over Reyes's shoulder and read the words aloud. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew something would happen." The search for Dale Tennyson intensified. He had no social media, no forwarding address. After retiring, he had closed all his accounts and left no contact information. The school had mailed his pension paperwork to a P.O. box in Bend, Oregon. That was the only lead. Reyes drove out. The P.O. box had been inactive since February. But across the street, at a second-hand bookstore, the clerk recognized Dale's photo immediately. He came in every few weeks, bought old war novels, paid in cash, never talked much. "When did you last see him?" "Maybe a month ago. Said he was heading south." "Something about the coast. Did he say where?" The clerk shook his head. "But he left this." From behind the counter, he pulled out a worn paperback, a separate piece. Tucked inside was a grocery receipt dated the 10th of April. The store? Brookings, Oregon. A coastal town, remote, quiet, easily forgotten, just like the drawer. Reyes called it in. Within 48 hours, Brookings PD had eyes on a man matching Dale's description, living in a small rented unit near the water. When they knocked on the door, no one answered. But the window showed movement. They waited. And then the silence grew. Inside, they found him slumped in a chair. Dale Tennyson was dead. A prescription bottle lay tipped on the floor. No note, no resistance. Just a man who had lived alone and chose to die the same way. But it wasn't the end. Because tucked beside his chair in a canvas satchel, police found something else. A collection of envelopes, each marked with a name. One of them, Rachel Morgan. Inside was a photograph. A blurred image of forest. A young girl, just a glimpse of her back standing near a tree. Stamped on the back in faded red, May 16, 2003. And below it, a single line in handwriting that matched the back of the bus ticket. She never got on the bus because I told her she couldn't. Rachel's body was not found that day. But something more powerful surfaced. Truth. Not in the form of justice delivered, but justice acknowledged. A puzzle piece, broken loose from the wall of silence, and finally laid bare. And for the first time in 20 years, her father stood at the edge of her favorite park trail, held the photograph to his chest, and said the only words he could manage, "I see you now." The police sealed the apartment for evidence, though there wasn't much left to collect. The canvas satchel, the one with the labeled envelopes, was now under forensic review. But it was the envelope labeled Rachel Morgan that turned the tide. Inside were 3 items. The faded photo of Rachel from behind, a small key wrapped in wax paper, and a single paragraph typed on yellowing paper. No salutation, no signature, just 12 lines. She trusted me. I told her it wasn't time to go back to the group. She said she was afraid of the trail. I told her there was another way. She followed. I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought she would calm down, understand. But when she ran, I panicked. I didn't check for a pulse. I left her in the clearing. I told myself it wasn't my fault, that she had fallen. But that isn't the truth. Not anymore. That paragraph ended 20 years of speculation. The man who wrote it was dead, but the damage he caused still echoed not just through the life he took, but the lives left behind. Detective Reyes stood in the clearing that Rachel had sketched so many years ago. The trail marker she once drew, a crooked wooden post with the word Creekside barely legible, was still there, weathered by decades of rain and Oregon moss. The coordinates matched. The tree line opened to a narrow patch of brush, not visible from the main trail, shielded by dense ferns. For 20 years, no one had searched this section in detail. The original search teams had focused south of the falls, not northeast. With the photo as reference and the newly discovered key in hand, Reyes and the forensic team began their dig. 4 inches beneath the surface, under a thin layer of decayed leaves and soil, they found it. A rusted metal box. Locked. They used the key. Inside, the remnants of a canvas bag. A child's watch with the hands frozen at 3:27. A sketchbook. Water. Damaged, but legible. And beneath that, small human remains. It took less than 48 hours to confirm via dental records. Rachel Morgan had been found. The news swept through Silverton like a storm without thunder. Quiet. Heavy. Inescapable. A girl once believed to be kidnapped, or lost, or even alive somewhere under a new name. All the theories, the letters her parents once hoped for, the birthdays missed, the empty desk in every classroom she would have sat in, ended with a few inches of dirt and a rusted lockbox. The town didn't want to look at itself. It never had. Not back in 2003, when a teacher's calm tone and clean shirt were enough to silence suspicion. Not in the years after, when Rachel became a name whispered at reunions or scrawled in chalk on the back wall of the gym. Only now did the questions come back with force. Why hadn't anyone seen? Why had they trusted him? And what do you do when the person meant to protect becomes the reason someone disappears? The school district issued a formal apology. A plaque was placed in the hallway near room 204 commemorating Rachel's memory. But the gesture felt hollow. Not because it wasn't sincere, but because sincerity had come 20 years too late. Tom Morgan declined interviews. Instead, he spent most days at Silver Falls, walking the same trail she once loved. He carried the sketchbook they'd recovered. Many of the pages were blurred from moisture, the pencil lines bleeding like shadows. But one page pressed near the center, protected from the elements, remained untouched. It was a drawing of a bridge. Wooden, narrow, spanning over shallow water. A single figure stood on the bridge's center arms at her side, face turned slightly down. And in the corner, her final written words. "If I go now, maybe someone will come back for me." Reyes had worked homicide long enough to know that closure doesn't come from arrest warrants or televised press conferences. Closure, real closure, is quieter. It comes in the form of Rachel's friend Aaron returning to that spot and placing a small wooden wind chime on a low branch. It comes when the principal, now retired and pale with guilt, leaves a letter of resignation in a sealed envelope marked "Should have known." It comes when the sketch Rachel drew, the one with the shadowed figure behind the bus, is framed in the library, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what should have never been ignored. It doesn't undo what happened, but it acknowledges it. Finally, there were still those who defended Dale Tennyson, former students who remembered him as strict but kind. A few claimed it had to be a mistake, that he must have broken in those final years, that something snapped. But the truth doesn't require consensus. It only requires the drawer to open, the evidence to breathe, and the right people to listen. 3 months after Rachel's remains were recovered, her father held a private memorial under the fir trees near the trail. Only a few were invited. The minister didn't read from Scripture. Instead, Tom stepped forward and said 4 words. "You can rest now." Then he laid the ticket, the original field trip pass, now sealed in a plastic sleeve beside the wooden box that held her ashes. It was the only item from her final day that had come full circle. From her hand, to the drawer, to the truth. The rain returned to Silverton in late September, soft at first, then insistent, like the town itself was trying to cleanse what had been buried for too long. Tom Morgan didn't speak to reporters. He declined invitations to panels, podcasts, and documentaries. For him, justice wasn't a narrative. It was a quiet fact. His daughter had been found. Her truth had surfaced, and what remained was space for grief, for memory, for silence. But for Detective Reyes, the case wasn't closed, not fully, because the note found in Dale Tennyson's bag, the one that ended with "I didn't check for a pulse," still left a question hanging like smoke in the air. Was Rachel Morgan truly dead when he left her? Or had she been alive even for a little while, waiting for someone who never came? The medical examiner's report came in 2 weeks after the remains were confirmed. The cause of death was inconclusive. The time of death was estimated within a 6-12-hour window after her last known sighting. Blunt force trauma could not be ruled out, but decomposition limited certainty. One note, however, stood out. Inside her backpack, preserved inside the rusted metal box, was a folded page from her sketchbook, torn clean, deliberate, and on it written faintly in pencil. "I hear water. I think he left. But I don't want to move. It's getting cold. R.M. No timestamp. No signature. Just a girl's final thought, written down in the dark." The revelation sparked another wave of grief, especially for Erin Blake. She hadn't left Silverton. Never did. Still worked part-time at the local library. Still passed the mural in the school hallway, where Rachel's name had once been scratched in. She sat across from Reyes in her living room, staring at the sketchbook page in silence. I think she wanted to be found," Erin said finally. "Not just her body. I mean her. Who she was. What she knew." "What did she know, Erin?" She hesitated. And then, almost in a whisper, "She wrote something to me once. After she got detention for skipping lunch, I kept it, but I never gave it to anyone. I was scared." She stood and opened a drawer by the window. From inside a worn paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, she pulled out a small, creased paper. It read, "You ever feel like someone's looking at you even when no one's there? I do. Especially when he calls my name like it's a secret." Me, the handwriting matched the sketchbook. Reyes brought the note to a handwriting specialist, just to be sure. The results came back in 3 days. A match. Rachel had left more behind than anyone knew, but no one had seen the pattern because no one had been looking for it. Now Reyes began searching with a different eye, not just for evidence, but for Rachel's voice hidden in plain sight. Old classmates were contacted again. One, a woman named Lindsay Harrow, had moved to Montana and worked as a high school art teacher. When reached, she hesitated at first, said she hadn't thought about Rachel in years. But then she remembered something. There was a story going around after she vanished, Lindsay said. It was dumb, probably just a rumor, but people said she had been talking to someone, like a man, outside of school. "Do you know who?" Reyes asked. "Number. But she passed me a note once in homeroom. I threw it away." She paused. "Wait, I think I copied part of it in my diary." She returned an hour later via video call with a red notebook from 2003. The entry read, "Rach says the man at the fence doesn't smile, he just watches. Says he's not supposed to be seen during school hours. I told her she's being paranoid. She just laughed." "Man at the fence," Reyes repeated. "Yeah," Lindsay said. "There was a side path between the parking lot and the woods, mostly fenced. I never thought anything of it. But someone had." The school janitor in 2003, a man named Ronald Griggs, was still alive, living in assisted care in Salem. Reyes visited him that Friday afternoon. Griggs, now in his late 70s, moved slowly but remembered the layout of the school with eerie clarity. "I used to smoke near that fence," he said. "No one came there but me." "Did you ever see anyone else there? Adults?" Griggs thought for a moment. "One time. A few days before that girl vanished. Thought it was odd." "Who was it?" "Couldn't see the face. He ducked back when I looked over, but I remember the shoes." "The shoes?" "Brown leather. Polished, like a teacher's." That detail came back again. The brown leather shoes, the ones captured in the edge of the Polaroid Aaron kept, were more than a fashion choice. They were a pattern. And that pattern now repeated itself across memories, notes, and near-forgotten observations. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. The confession from Dale had been brief, evasive. He never admitted intent, never detailed how Rachel died, and without more, no legal closure could be sought. But the court of truth was different, and it had one more witness to call. Late one night, 2 months after Rachel's remains were found, Reyes received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was dry, careful, older. "You don't know me," the man said, "but I knew Dale. We were in a book club, back in 2009, only lasted a few months." Reyes listened. One night after too much wine, he started talking about Silverton, about what the woods remember. I didn't get it, thought he was rambling, but then he said something. "What did he say?" The voice hesitated. He said, "I know where she is, but I'll never tell. I've already lost enough." Then he went quiet, never spoke of it again. Reyes scribbled the words down. "Why are you calling me now?" "Because I saw the story," the man said, "and I realized someone should have listened then. I didn't. Maybe you still can." He hung up. Reyes sat there in silence. A week later, Reyes requested permission to reopen a second drawer, this one locked in the school archives, sealed since the 2010 renovation. It contained unused keys, student files, and one box labeled Unsorted 2003. Inside were forgotten PTA newsletters, event flyers, and a VHS tape, unlabeled. He took it home, found an old VCR, played it. The image flickered. A school hallway. Empty. Then Rachel. Walking, looking over her shoulder. A figure follows just visible behind the corner. The timestamp? May 15, 2003. The day before she vanished. The figure never steps fully into frame, but the shoes are visible. Brown, leather, gleaming. Rachel turns, stops. Her mouth moves as if to speak. Then the tape cuts. Reyes rewound it 6 times, and on the 6th he finally noticed it. In Rachel's hand just before she turns is a slip of paper. She tucks it behind a vent near the floor, a narrow slat beneath the trophy case. The next morning, Reyes brought in the maintenance team. They unscrewed the vent. Inside, a torn piece of notebook paper curled from age. The ink was faded, but it was legible. If I go missing, he did it. Check my drawings. He's always behind me. Always. Rachel M. For the first time in 20 years, Rachel Morgan's voice rose not from memory, not from rumor, but from her own hand. She had left it behind. She had trusted the future to catch up. And now finally it had. For 2 decades, the narrative was silence. Rachel Morgan had disappeared. And in that silence, people created their own truths, comforting, convenient, or simply easier to carry. But with one line of handwritten warning retrieved from the dusty vent beneath the trophy case, all those imagined narratives collapsed. Her voice had survived the rot. And it had spoken. The next morning, Detective Reyes stood in front of the school board with the VHS tape in one hand and Rachel's note in the other. This wasn't a disappearance, he told them. This was a cry for help, ignored in real time. This was a child who predicted what would happen to her and documented it. She hid the evidence because she didn't trust the adults around her to protect her. Silence filled the room. A former board member, now retired, face hollow, leaned forward and said quietly, "We failed her." Reyes didn't reply, because failure was no longer up for debate. Now the only question was, how deep did that failure go? The hallway where Rachel was last captured on tape hadn't changed much. New tiles, fresh paint. But the angles were the same. Reyes walked it slowly, following her final documented path step by step. She had turned, looked behind her, slipped the note into the vent. Then what? There was a gap, maybe 2 minutes. Then the tape cut. Reyes called the technician who had digitized the footage. "Did anything else come with that tape?" "A second cassette," the tech replied. "Unlabeled, but it was blank or mostly." Mostly? The tech explained there were a few seconds of static, then a flicker of hallway light and a silhouette. The rest was recorded over. Reyes reviewed the second tape himself. There it was, the silhouette. Brief, hard to make out, but the posture was unmistakable. Shoulders drawn tight, head angled to the left as if listening for footsteps. It wasn't Rachel. It was taller. And facing the vent. What if the person she feared found the note before anyone else could? Reyes ordered a forensic analysis of the paper. Despite the decades, they were able to lift partial prints. One matched Rachel. Another came back inconclusive. Too smudged. Too faint. But the orientation was telling. The smudge was pressed into the back of the paper, not where Rachel wrote it, but where someone would hold it if reading in a hurry. Someone who may have stuffed it back and hoped no one would find it again. Only Rachel had folded it tight enough to wedge behind the grate. Someone else had tried to take it and changed their mind. Erin Blake returned to the school grounds for the first time in years. She stood beside the old vent, arms crossed, her eyes distant. "I used to sit here after lunch," she murmured. Rachel hated that trophy case. She said it celebrated people who didn't notice things. Notice what?" Reyes asked. She said some people walk through school like it's a stage play. Lines memorized. Emotions fake. But she could tell when something was real. When someone was hiding in plain sight. Erin turned, faced the old homeroom door. She never said his name, but I think she wanted me to figure it out. Reyes revisited Rachel's sketchbook, now housed in the evidence vault. One image stood out. It depicted a staircase, narrow, crooked. At the top was a single door, outlined in red. Beside it, a small square box with slats. A vent. Underneath, "He stands still when the bell rings, but he never walks away." The timestamp matched a class change period. Reyes scanned the school layout. The stairwell in the West Wing fit the sketch. It led to an old projection room used in the 80s for AV equipment, now sealed and converted into a storage closet. He requested the master key. When he unlocked the door, a wave of air escaped dry, musty, untouched. Inside were dusty chairs, broken film reels, and one item tucked behind an old cart, a brown leather-bound notebook half buried under a sheet of clear plastic. It wasn't school property. It wasn't labeled. And inside were names. The notebook belonged to Dale Tennyson. Each page was marked with dates, student initials, and brief comments. Some were innocuous. Mail late again. M. JP needs speech therapy follow-up. But others were unsettling. EM avoids eye contact. Must probe further. RM continues pattern of tracking me in class. Noted sketching, repeated drawing of trees. The final entry. RM 5/16. Seemed aware. No return bus. Will manage separately. Beneath that, a line crossed out. Illegible. Then, silence. It wasn't enough for criminal prosecution, not now, not with Dale dead, but it painted a portrait of obsession, control, manipulation masked as mentorship, and Rachel had sensed it. She'd drawn it, written it, hid it. Now the notebook would be added to the evidence archive, not for trial, but for truth. Back in Silverton, word of the notebook spread fast. Parents began asking about other students. Former classmates posted online, recounting moments they'd long buried odd stares, strange praise, unexplained discipline. The district hotline received 23 calls in 2 days. Most were vague. Some were chilling. And one came from a man named Trevor Holt, now 32, living in California. He had been a student in Rachel's class. He asked if the case was really closed. Not until we know what else he did, Reyes replied. Trevor hesitated. Then, there's something I need to send you. 2 days later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a drawing, a crude stick figure, a child standing beside a larger figure with no face. The child held a sign that said, "Bus stop." It's no. Trevor's note read, I drew this in 5th grade. Tennyson took it from me. I found it again in my old folder. He wrote one word on the back, noted. I never understood why. But I remember what Rachel said the week before she vanished, that he watched everything, even the things we didn't mean to show. Reyes stared at the back of the paper, and for the first time, wondered just how many others had tried to speak, only to be filtered out, dismissed, or silenced. A local journalist, Claire Dunning, began compiling a full retrospective of the case. She called it The Note in the Drawer. It ran in 3 Sunday editions, featured testimonies, timelines, and the full sketchbook excerpted in black and white. But her most haunting piece was an op-ed. In it, she wrote, The tragedy of Rachel Morgan is not only that she died, but that she was alive long enough to warn us, and no one listened. She left a breadcrumb trail of drawings, glances, whispers, and paper notes, but adults, trained to seek order over intuition, explained it away. We called her quiet, troubled, imaginative. But she was right. And we were wrong. At the annual Fall Fair, the town unveiled a new bench beneath the tallest cedar at Silver Falls State Park, the place Rachel once sketched, the place her father said she felt most seen. Etched into the backrest were her own words, taken from the sketchbook page found beside her remains. I sit in shade, my name unknown, a path to silence, all alone. But now, she wasn't alone. Now, the town knew her name, and it would never forget it again. In the weeks that followed the notebook's discovery, the town of Silverton began to fracture not into chaos, but into uneasy truths. Parents held longer stares at the school drop-off line. Teachers who had served for decades quietly resigned, and students who once thought Rachel Morgan was just a name on a cold case flyer now realized she had been a voice buried inside their walls all along. Detective Reyes kept working. He wasn't after an arrest, not anymore. He was after a reckoning. He compiled timelines, redacted testimonies, and combed over every file Rachel had ever touched. Not for evidence of crime, but for confirmation of what she saw, how she saw it, and who else might have seen it too. And then came the unexpected message. An email. Anonymous. The subject line. I should have stopped it. The body. She came to me the day before she vanished. I told her to focus on her studies. I didn't believe her. I didn't want to. But she looked scared, not confused, terrified. She drew something in my planner before she left my office. I tore the page out. It's still in my drawer. It was signed with 2 initials. Reyes scanned faculty records from 2003. Only one match. Samantha Heller, former school counselor. She had retired in 2014, moved to Eugene, and hadn't spoken publicly about Rachel's case, not once. Reyes drove there the next morning. Heller lived in a modest ranch house tucked between rows of pine. She looked older than expected, not because of age, but because of something else. Like she'd carried her years rather than lived them. I thought someone would come eventually, she said, inviting him in. I need to see the page, Reyes replied. She walked to a bookshelf, reached behind a stack of therapy journals, and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a torn sheet thick, like planner paper, and drawn in fine pencil was an image of a girl sitting on a bus seat, hands clasped, eyes fixed straight ahead. Behind her again the shadow, no face, only the shoes. At the bottom she had written, he said, if I spoke, the trip would end early. I didn't want to ruin it for everyone. I stayed quiet. I stayed scared. Heller looked at Reyes, her voice hollow. I told her she was imagining things, that not everyone who watches is dangerous. I was tired. I was new. I didn't want conflict with a senior teacher. Her hands trembled. She thanked me anyway, and left. Reyes folded the page gently. Why didn't you come forward after she vanished? Heller's eyes brimmed with tears. Because I thought I'd cost her her life. The school board convened a public forum the following week. It was the first time since Rachel's remains were found that town officials invited open discussion. The auditorium was packed. Students, alumni, parents, teachers. Some had known Rachel. Others had only known the story fractured, incomplete. One by one, they spoke. A girl from the class below Rachel's described how Dale Tennyson once grabbed her wrist during a lunchline dispute. Another said he used to linger in the girl's hallway under the excuse of checking lighting. A man who once served on the PTA admitted to raising concerns in a closed-door session and being told to trust the staff, not the rumors. And then, from the back of the room, Erin Blake stood up. Her voice was clear. Steady. I saw her that morning. I watched her get on the bus. I knew something was wrong. I felt it, but I said nothing, because I was scared of being wrong. She paused, but I was more scared of being right. No one clapped. They just listened, and that after so many years was something. Reyes revisited the final pages of Rachel's sketchbook again. This time he didn't look for evidence. He looked for intention. One image stood out. It showed a spiral wide at the top, narrowing downward. At the bottom, a tiny figure curled into itself. Beneath it, she had written, I'm not sure which is louder, being lost or being forgotten. He scanned the spiral and realized what she'd done. The pattern matched the old school schedule passing periods, class blocks, lunch. She was illustrating a cycle, a system, a daily routine that trapped her. Each day smaller, tighter, until it collapsed on her completely. Rachel hadn't just drawn what happened. She had drawn how it felt. Tom Morgan visited the park again that week, Silver Falls, where Rachel had last smiled on camera. This time, he brought no speech, no sketchbook, only a red tulip, her favorite. He walked to the base of the cedar tree, set the flower down, and whispered, You did everything right. Behind him, a little girl and her mother walked past. The girl pointed at the bench and asked, Who is that for? Her mother read the engraving out loud, then said, A girl who saw something others didn't. And the girl said simply, I would have listened. Tom closed his eyes. He let the wind carry the sound of that voice away. The town began to change. Not quickly, not entirely, but noticeably, A new protocol was adopted in the school district. Any student complaint, even subtle or nonverbal, would now be documented and reviewed. A program called the Rachel Report was launched, a private encrypted system where students could leave anonymous concerns or images. Art classes were redesigned with one assignment per semester. Draw what you don't know how to say. The counselor's office was moved to the center of the building, no longer tucked away near the boiler room. And the vent behind the trophy case? It was removed, replaced by a glass shadow box. Inside, on display, sat Rachel's final note, not behind metal but behind light. Reyes compiled his final report 6 months after the drawer was opened. He titled it simply, Witness in Her Own Words. It contained sketches, notes, testimonies, and the thesis that Rachel Morgan had done everything within her 11-year-old power to ask for help. And the adults around her had failed her not because they didn't care, but because they didn't listen closely enough to a child speaking in shadows. He printed 5 copies. 1 went to the Morgan family, 1 to the school board, 1 to the Oregon State Archives, 1 to the National Database of Unsolved Child Disappearances, now marked Closed with Findings. And the final copy? He kept in his desk drawer, not to bury it, but to remind himself that every drawer should be opened. Eventually, spring returned to Silverton slowly that year. The snow receded in strips, like peeled paper from the hillsides, revealing old footprints, brittle ferns, and paths no one had walked in years. The trees remained quiet. But something in the silence had shifted. The story of Rachel Morgan had circulated far beyond town limits. National newspapers ran features. Morning shows requested interviews. Documentarians reached out. But Tom Morgan declined all of them. He wasn't interested in letting the world dissect his daughter. Not now. Not again. She had already been misinterpreted in life. He would not allow her truth to be refracted through another lens. Instead, he chose to finish something he had started long ago, her last drawing. The one Rachel had begun the night before the trip. The one with only 2 pencil lines and a sun partially sketched in the corner. Tom set up an easel in his garage, and day by day he filled it in, not with what she had drawn, but with what she might have seen. A road winding toward a bus. A girl standing at the edge, not afraid, but aware. And in the background, trees not looming, but listening. He titled it simply, She Knew. In the school library, a section was renamed The Rachel Corner. It included student poetry, sketches, and selected works on awareness, advocacy, and trauma-informed teaching. But its most powerful piece sat in the smallest frame, a photocopy of her note from behind the vent. If I go missing, he did it. Check my drawings. Below it, in typewriter font, a caption read, Sometimes the smallest voice leaves the loudest echo. Students passed it daily. Some paused, others didn't. But it was there, permanent, visible, the way Rachel never was. Detective Reyes took leave after the report was filed. Not retirement, just time. For the first time in years, he visited his sister in Nevada. Hiked, cooked, watched baseball. But Rachel's story followed him not as guilt, but as purpose. He began writing a lecture, one not for law enforcement, but for schools, counselors, PTA meetings. He called it The Language of Warning, What Children Tell Us Without Saying It. And every slide began with her drawings. Most predators don't hide in shadows, he said in his first public talk. They hide in routine, authority, familiarity. But the children, they tell us. In notes, in eyes, in silence. If we're not trained to hear them, we fail them. The room was quiet. One woman raised her hand. What if we've already failed someone? Reyes posed. Then we listen now. We change now. Because someone else is watching how we respond. Erin Blake left Silverton the following autumn. She moved to Portland, enrolled in a graduate program in child psychology, and began interning at a youth crisis center. She carried a single photo in her wallet, the one of her and Rachel at age 10, grinning wide in front of a science fair volcano. No one else knew it was her reminder, a compass pointed at the child she once failed to protect. In her first intake session, a quiet boy handed her a crumpled drawing of a house on fire. No words, just black crayon smoke. She didn't dismiss it. She didn't frame it as imaginative. "As me?" she asked him. "What's on the inside?" And for the first time that day the boy spoke. 2 years after the case reopened, a ceremony was held at the state capitol. Not a memorial, a policy signing. The Morgan Act. It mandated visual expression reviews in middle schools statewide, ensuring all student artwork flagged with themes of isolation, fear, or persistent observation would be seen by trained counselors within 48 hours. Tom Morgan didn't speak at the podium. He simply stood beside the governor and held up a copy of Rachel's drawing. The one with the spiral. The one no one had ever looked closely at until it was too late. Now, it would never be overlooked again. Some questions never got answered. Where exactly in the woods had Dale Tennyson left Rachel? Had he planned it? Was it impulse? Had he meant to go back? Had she cried out? Had someone heard and said nothing? Those questions haunted no courtroom, but they haunted kitchens, classrooms, midnight walks, and that Detective Reyes often said was a different kind of justice. Not the kind that ends with a gavel, but the kind that begins with a mirror. Every spring now, on the date of the field trip, Silverton holds a walk through Silver Falls. It isn't formal, no speeches, no signage, just families, students, staff, walking the same paths the 5th grade class once walked. This year they added a marker by the waterfall overlook. It reads, Rachel Morgan, 1992, 2003. She left us signs. We found them too late. We promise not to do that again. People leave flowers, bus tickets, sketches. Some are drawings of monsters. Others are just eyes, watching. And every time someone new sees one and says quietly, "She wasn't crazy." She was right. She was brave. Tom Morgan doesn't visit the marker often. He prefers quiet places. The bench in the park. The edge of her bed still made. The shelf of sketchbooks. But one afternoon in early April, he visited the school alone. The principal met him at the entrance. "Would you like to see the new display?" He nodded. They walked past lockers, quiet now. Past the glass case where trophies once sat, to the display at the heart of the hallway, the listening wall. Dozens of framed student drawings hung like a mosaic: fear, joy, confusion, hope. In the center, Rachel's spiral. Beneath it, a button. Tom pressed it, and a speaker crackled softly to life, playing a recording Aaron had found on an old camcorder from their science project days. Rachel's voice. Young, unsure, but clear. Sometimes I think drawings are just a way to talk without getting interrupted. Tom closed his eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, he heard her, really heard her. The story of Rachel Morgan didn't end with a solved case. It didn't end with a burial or a plaque. It ended where it should have started, in recognition. Recognition that a child's whisper can be louder than an adult's denial. That a crayon mark can be a warning sign. That a missing bus ticket, crumpled in a drawer, can reopen a buried truth. That a girl who disappeared didn't vanish into silence, but into the spaces we failed to look. Now, the world looks. Now, we listen.